Thank you very much, Karen, and also a big thank you for inviting us to Armenia to this seminar to introduce companies and business associations and other persons who are in the audience to our tool. The European Commission has set up this tool especially for exporters in non-EU countries because we would like to assist you with all the necessary information that you need when you plan to export a specific product to the EU. And the tool can give you the following parts of information. It does not only give you the customs duties, it also gives you figures of trade flows. So Armenian companies can check how much of the product they might plan to export to the EU is already exported to the EU. And we can tell you, as soon as you launch a product-specific search, we can tell you whether a product falls under GSP or not. So in the tab for tariffs, you will see that. And you can also check what the rules of origin are according to the GSP regulation. So I thank you already in advance for your attention. And I will start to guide you into this practical tool that you can use once you have a computer and internet access. The Export Helpdesk is already very successful. We created it in 2005, so in the last 10 years it has continuously grown the number of people who are using it all over the world. What I displayed here are the top 10 countries that are using it already. You will see that also Ukraine is amongst the top 10 users. And then if we go down the group and we display the top 20 users, we can see which other countries are using the system the most. At the same time, we notice that it's not only exporters in non-EU countries who are using it, but also importers on the other side. So amongst the top 10, you can see already that Spain is the biggest user, for example. And there is also Luxembourg, France, United Kingdom and Belgium, who are among the top 10 users. So all these users are coming to our website and make up around 2,600 visits per day. Some figures for Armenia. In this year, so 2015, we had 461 visits from Armenia. And I expect after today that this figure gets a steep rise. We also see on the sheet that people stay around 7 minutes on the website. In 7 minutes you can find lots of information, and you can definitely find all the important elements that you need for your product. Some figures for comparison. The tool has been used almost 1,000 times from Georgia this year, 1,200 times from Moldova, 290 times from Azerbaijan, Ukraine, a figure we saw before, 17,000, Russia 4,200. You see, Russia is a huge country, but the tool might not be communicated over there. So what we conclude from it is that something that exists also needs to be communicated. My talk to you today is our initiative to spread this information. What comes next is that we rely on you to spread this information further. So every one of you who comes from an association, from a trade association, from an exporters agency, has now the task to spread this information amongst your members. How does it help the companies? So what can they get out of it? First of all, what we compile in the tool is all the EU legislation that applies to products. We have made this effort to inform companies in the most transparent way about all the EU regulations that apply to one or the other product. Second element, the customs duties. So you will see which custom duty applies to a product exported from any country in the world. And the second element would then be GSP, whether it applies or not, and how high the rate is for GSP. How to make use of reduced duties. If you make use of GSP, you will need to fulfill certain rules, as Alina has already pointed out. Fill in the form, Form A in most cases, or where the export value is less than 6,000 euros, an invoice declaration is sufficient. What we have in the tool as well is the competent authorities in the EU member states that are in charge of various sectors of EU regulations. So depending which product we talk about, we give you the names, the contact details, the web addresses, the links to the competent authorities in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, depending on where your product is supposed to be imported. These competent authorities can also give you valuable additional information about what is expected from your product, because not all the legislation is harmonized amongst the 28 EU member states in the EU, but there might be, especially when it comes to labeling the product, there might be additional requirements imposed by the importing country. And there is the element of trade flows. So in the statistics, you can check how much of which product is already exported from Armenia. Why is this helpful? Our tool is available online. As I said, everything you need is a computer or a mobile phone. You can also access the system with your mobile phone and internet access. All the information is free of charge. You don't need to pay for any of these information elements. Our data are up to date. As I just mentioned to Karen earlier, when I come back to Brussels tomorrow, there is a new data set waiting for me to be published. So it's a data set that was uploaded in our system and covers all the updates that we have been doing since July. So we update the data 4 times a year. The latest one that is now published was July. The next one that will be published will cover all the information that we have about our own legislation up to October this year. We have the trade figures ready, as I mentioned, and we have a contact form on the website that each of you can use. Not in Armenian language, but in English, because the EU does not cover the Armenian language. You can send us an individual request concerning your product, or it could also be more general about the EU market, and we will respond to you. It's online, is in English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, because with these languages we cover the most exporting markets. We do not consider Armenian there, and you will have to send us your question in one of these 4 languages, and we can respond in these 4 languages. What does the website look like? This is our homepage. It contains a lot of text. It contains explanations about the EU market, about the fact that we are an internal market. This has a concrete consequence for you as well, because it means as soon as your product is accepted on a market, for example on the German market, and you have it was imported into Germany, the product can freely flow into all the other markets. So the market you are actually targeting consists of 500 million consumers, and you don't need to comply with other regulations other than, for example, labeling that might be member state specific. What I would like to point out here is that The My Export form is the door into the database. So as soon as you need product-specific information, you open our search form, you define the parameters to find the information that you need for your specific product. What the tool doesn't provide, I've listed here. We are not an info line or call center, meaning we cannot be called 24 hours a day. We are not a trade finance or technical assistance program, so you cannot get money out of us, just information. But I believe information is very often just as important as money. We are not displaying market intelligence data. I cannot tell you how our tariffs developed over the past 10 years. I cannot take care of your business plans. We are also not covering private standards. So this especially comes in when we talk about food being exported and then being sold by supermarkets. Many supermarkets already have certain private standards because consumers are simply demanding those. So this could relate to fair trade or organic products or special requirements concerning the packaging, for example. And we are not matchmaking exporters with importers. This has also a legal reason, because the EU institutions do not have the mandate that's imposed by the member states, actually. We do not have the mandate to promote trade. We can only inform you about trade, but we cannot promote trade directly to businesses. And this is why we are not involved in matchmaking. How does it work? The first step is to define the correct product code for your product. If you are already exporting and you are already using the HS system, the harmonized system for product classification, then this exercise will be relatively easy for you, because the first 6 digits of the product code are the same with the system we are using. We also help you to find your product code. We have a search tool within the Export Helpdesk, where you put in a keyword and the system shows you where in the whole product classification system this word appears. And this allows you to go further down in detail which product you are actually looking for. When I read about Armenia, it was mentioned that Armenia has the world's best apricots. So I chose apricots here as the example. So in this search tool, you would then put in apricots and see where in the classification system apricots are mentioned. And we see from the differentiation here that the classification system covers fresh apricots, just as well as preserved ones, just as well as dried ones, or further processed ones in jellies and marmalade. So depending what your product is, you will choose the right product code for you. This gives us now all the necessary elements to fill in the search form. We have the code for apricots. We define Armenia as exporting country and any EU member state as importing country. Which search results can you get? For apricots, you will then get all the EU requirements that apply to edible fruits and nuts, everything that has been published up to October 2015, meaning these legal references and links that we give on the website are up to date. So you can rely on all the information that you find there. An optional requirement would be the one for organic production. So if you are interested in knowing all the rules for organic production, you can find them there as well. Second element, the system tells you how much tariff any country will pay, and that for apricots there is 0% customs duty to pay. at the border. We give the rules of origin. More elements are the VAT rates. I have chosen here for my example, Poland would be the importing country. So the system will display for you that Poland has a VAT rate of 5% for fruits and vegetables. This is relevant information because EU member states have very different VAT rates. The VAT rate could range from as low as 5% up to as high as 27%. Hungary, for example, has a VAT rate of 27%. It's, of course, the general VAT rate. Apricots might be 6, 8, or 9%, or even up to 12. But you can see that in the system immediately when the results come up. What else do we provide? We provide additional information on VAT in Poland. We provide information on import procedures in Poland, which means that you can find all the customs offices there, all the competent authorities in Poland that deal with imports of fruits and vegetables, and the competent authorities that deal with all the EU regulations that apply to fruits and vegetables. So this makes it quite easy to take contact with these authorities and double check what Poland expects from your product. And you can, of course, check the trade flow of apricots between Armenia and the EU, or then also between Armenia and Poland. What do the results look like on screen? The results come in 3 tabs. On the first tab, we call Requirements tab. The second one is Tariffs. The third one is Rules of Origin. This is displayed on a single page. You just click on the different tabs to retrieve the information. First one is Requirements, Tariffs, and Rules of Origin. And on the first tab, we can see the list of requirements that applies to apricots. So this is a tailor-made list. It will change depending on which product you put into the system. And we can see that there's one requirement concerning contaminants in foodstuffs. I will go a bit more into detail on this later. These, for example, are the requirements for fruit juices. So we have a slightly different list because we talk about fruits that have been processed. These are the requirements for crayfish. The list is longer. The product is of animal origin, is a fishery product, and the requirements here reflect this fact that EU regulations are there is more EU legislation on the product when it comes to animal products, and there is even more requirements to fulfill when it comes to fishery products. And for freshwater crayfish, which has been farmed, there is yet another requirement on aquaculture. This is why the second requirement that we see on screen, control of residues of veterinary medicines, we list here, and we also add the mention that this is only required for aquaculture and not for fresh fish that is fished in the sea, for example. Veterinary medicines would only come into the scene when you farm fish. Another example, apparel, meaning clothing. I've chosen here men's or boys' overcoats and raincoats, and we can see the list of requirements that applies. We see that labeling for textiles applies. We see that there is a restriction on the use of certain chemical substances when textiles are produced. And there are technical standards for personal protective equipment. I just heard that you have some clothing for workers in some car production plants. Always at the end, an additional option as a voluntary thing If you want to produce textile products under the European Eco label, you can find all the information there. If we continue this example on apparel, the second element of information that you can see is the tariffs. We have on the screen replicated what we were looking for. So we looked for apparel, in this case again men's or boys' overcoats. We see the code replicated. I have chosen parkas, men's or boys' parkas. And what shows on the screen is the normal tariff rate of 12%. And thanks to the GSP regime, the tariff rate is 0 for this type of apparel. Another result, another example for fruit juices. So I've chosen preparations of vegetable or fruits. And we can see that there the normal tariff rate would be 17.6%. GSP, and you immediately have it displayed here that GSP applies for this product. So this screenshot is an indicator whether GSP applies or not. So the question that we had earlier, whether GSP applies for honey or for any other product, this is the way to check. If there is no GSP tariff rate mentioned, then GSP does not apply. So the system takes apart those products that are under the GSP system and those that are not. And if they do not benefit from any trade preference, it would not be displayed here. On the example for apricots, in this case, I think I have chosen fresh apricots. If they are exported to the EU, the normal tariff rate would be 20%. On a certain quota, non-EU exporters can export apricots in a specific period of time for 10%, but you are a beneficiary country of GSP, so for you in any case, it's 0 duty for apricots. Tariff rates for crayfish. You can see the code 03062910. The tariffs would be normally 7.5%. Under GSP, 0%. So once you start using the system, you can check that for every single product. We come to the next information element that I mentioned before, and that's VAT rates and specific documents on import procedures. There we display not only the VAT rates, but also if some specific additional information applies to some products. So under apricots that I've chosen here, there is no extra information. What you still have is a document about Poland and VAT, so you can read about how Poland is administrating VAT. You would have that document as well for the EU. Another one for import procedures for Poland, where you could see all the customs offices for Poland and other competent authorities, and an import procedure document about the EU. A document very, very relevant because it lists general requirements that are not per se product specific that the EU applies, and this is worthwhile to be read. Now we come into rules of origin. That's the third tab that was displayed earlier. And we can see here that we talk about preparations of vegetables and fruits. So I have chosen fruits and nuts here. And we can see that the rules of origin are fairly complex. I'm not sure whether fruits as such can be imported into Armenia and they would still comply with the rules of origin. I don't think that if there is only 1 or 2 processing steps, it would be allowed under GSP. I have something mentioned here that materials who have too high sugar content, and if processing implies another use of more sugar, then they might not comply with the rules of origin anymore. If we look at the rules of origin for crayfish, we have clearly mentioned the term wholly obtained. It means that all the crayfish that you are exporting has to come from Armenia. We have different cases where there is a tolerance, or where a certain percentage needs to be used from the country that is exporting the product. And for example, 20% of the product could be added and is of the origin of another country. But in this case, all the crayfish needs to come from Armenia. When we get to textiles, I would encourage you, if you have specific questions on textiles and rules of origin, I would like to encourage you to send us a specific request, and I would like to respond to that in writing, because the rules of origin for textiles are extremely complex. It has to do with the processing, whether it's one processing step, 2 processing steps. Very often it's the minimum is 2 processing steps, but then there is a definition of what means processing step. Does it mean you just add the buttons to the t-shirt or not? So this needs to be looked into by our rules of origin experts back in Brussels. The third element of information are the trade statistics. I have chosen fish and crustaceans here, and have defined the product code for crayfish. So what we can see is the export figures of Armenia for 2012, 2013 and 2014, and how these exports developed. We can see that there was a slight drop in value of exports from Armenia if we compare these 3 countries. When we look further and we click on Armenia, then we can see more details about exports and where exactly they go in the European Union. So we can see that I think 8 or 10 countries out of the 28 member states of the EU are already importing crayfish from Armenia. And important to know is that if you're interested in figures earlier than 2012, you can get that out of the system. We have all figures in there back to 2002. And these are figures that come from the European Statistical Office. And the European Statistical Office depends on the figures that are reported by the member states. So there might be a slight change throughout the year. This is in euro. More details, I have specified here men's or boys' overcoats according to the example that we used earlier for trade, for customs duties and requirements. There the figure has doubled since 2012. So you are heavily in the market, I would say. And we can see concretely which countries are already importing textiles from Armenia. For any questions that companies have, or trade associations have, or you personally have, I would encourage you to contact the EU delegation. This is certainly most relevant in case you are placing your question in Armenian, because the delegation can help to translate them and then inform us. And the same way it would work with the response. So our response would come in English and would then be translated here. Or you lodge a specific request on via our contact form that is on the website. And we would be most grateful if you could place the question in English or in one of the EU languages. I close here the first part of my presentation. I have a bit more specifically on requirements, but I would like to collect questions already on this first part, if you agree. Thanks a lot for your attention. I have prepared to give you some more information on the requirements, on the list that we saw before, on the search results that you get as soon as you do a search. I have prepared the list of legislation that applies concretely to 3 different product groups. And I would like to go through these requirements. For agricultural products, we have often mentioned as a first requirement the requirement on contaminants in foodstuffs. What are contaminants? Contaminants could be heavy metals, for example, like lead or mercury. You will need to prove that the products that you export don't contain these heavy metals, for example. In this specific legislation, there is an annex that lists which contaminants we talk about and to which extent these contaminants can be on your product. It would be totally illusional to request 0.0% of these contaminants, but we have scientific committees who have defined the maximum level that can be in your product. The second legislation I mention here is the control of pesticide residues. It concerns plant products that are intended for human consumption. This is an important differentiation element. What we define in the legislation, again in an annex of this legislation, is the maximum residue levels of these pesticides. There are 462 pesticides mentioned that you can use for the production of your plant or of your fruits, and maximum residue levels have been defined for each of those. The third piece of legislation that I'm mentioning here is the general health control on foodstuffs for non-animal origin. Second part, there is legislation on plant health control, and this concerns pest control. Imports of plant products, again listed in a specific annex, must be accompanied by an official phytosanitary certificate. So this is one of the important certificates that needs to be produced and shown at customs. So this is part of customs inspection. And I've listed on this slide what this inspection consists in. There is a documentary check in order to ensure that the certificate is there. They check who has issued it, and they check also how your fruits are packaged. In case you are using wooden material as a packaging for the fruits, there is also phytosanitary measures that we apply because we need to be sure that the wood is not yet molding, for example. This is especially on pests. I know that customs offices usually do their selection of controls based on their own experience. So they know already shipping companies that are involved and exporters that have often already exported products, and where they found problems in the past, they will definitely be controlled again. And then in addition, there is random checks of new importers or exporters. What we saw on the list before also is the traceability issue. EU authorities would like to know and would like to be able to check quickly where a product comes from and where it exactly comes from. And this is especially relevant when there's a problem, when there is contamination of food. We need to be able to trace the whole chain of transport and see where the product comes from to immediately solve it. If we would close down the market entirely, this would have a very detrimental effect on all trading activities. We have marketing standards. These are mainly about quality These are mainly quality standards. Labeling is most relevant, and here it's not only about labeling that applies in the EU in general, but there is always additional labeling requirements imposed by the member state where you export to. So some elements of labeling is which information needs to be on the packaging of the product, in which size it needs to be written so that consumers don't have big difficulties in identifying it. And a relatively new element is information on allergens. The voluntary option is always there on organic production, and look into this in case you are interested in exporting organic products. I've listed this here specifically, so there is 2 regulations that fall under organic production. It concerns not only the production, but also the way you process your product, the way you package your product, the way it's transported, and even stored. Certain products and substances cannot be used or can only be used to up to a certain extent. So you would need to read that in detail, and the whole database provides you direct links to the legislation that applies. In addition to explanatory sheets that we give you as a first reading. Products who have been genetically modified are not allowed under the organic label. Whenever you export organic products, you can use the organic production logo that's been designed by us. And there are certain inspection activities that take place. Once you start producing organic products, you need a competent authority that comes to the farms, to the production places to check whether the rules have been respected. Another group of products when we talk about agricultural products is those of animal origin. So it means that everything I mentioned before would apply, plus additional ones. And I mentioned here the health control for fishery products and specific labeling rules for fishery products. In addition, there is a control of residues of veterinary medicines. So there needs to be a record which medicines have been used and at which point in time, complemented by the information on when the product has been harvested. So what the legislation says there is that each third country that wishes to export food of animal origin needs to submit to the Commission an annual residue monitoring plan. This is usually organized by one of the competent authorities in an exporting state. We also checked, and Armenia is of course listed in this residues list, and this is a prerequisite to export food, and in this case crayfish, to European member states. The other product group that I've chosen was apparel, as we've seen before on anoraks or other products that are exported already by Armenia. What applies is labeling provisions for textiles, and you have the regulation mentioned here. When we talk about textiles, we also easily get to chemical substances that are used during the production. And the legislation there says the placing on the EU market of textile articles containing certain substances are prohibited or restricted depending on whether these chemicals are listed. There is specific technical standards for personal protective equipment, and we also have an eco-label that applies to textile products. This was just a short trip into more legislative information, but it is the details that follow from the list of requirements that you get at first when you start looking for all the elements for exports. Thanks a lot.